Hold fire, Tony. The members had a chance to look through the previous minutes. Well, was rushing to the discussion, but they had one set of minutes to agree. Happy to agree those minutes. The 6th of March minutes, even though I was the chair. I happy to sign them in Councillor Smart's absence, correct? Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Tony. Start again, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise in advance for that croaky state of my voice. I hope it won't interfere with clear communication. I think most members are familiar with this site from previous applications. It stands on the corner of Mill Road and Coleridge Road. It is within the Mill Road Conservation Area, and the building on the site is a building of local interest. There are residential uses to the east and south. The site is outside the controlled parking zone, but the area to the south and west on the opposite side of Coleridge Road is within the controlled parking zone. Now, I think I need to deal with the previous applications in some detail. I've set out site history in paragraph 2.0 of my report, which is on page 20. There are some things which I need to make clear about this. A proposal for student accommodation on this site was considered and refused by the planning committee in July 2017. A new proposal, which was reference 180002 for student accommodation, in which the mass of the building was reduced from that earlier application, was considered by the planning committee in March 2018. And committee resolved to approve that application subject to the completion of Section 106 agreement. Now, for reasons which I explain in paragraphs 2.3 to 2.5 of my report on page 21, the application was not determined before the 2018 local plan took precedence in decision making. The new plan supports student accommodation proposals only if the applicant has entered into a formal agreement with an education provider. Such an agreement did not exist in this case, and the application was therefore brought back to committee and refused for that reason only. The wording of that reason for refusal of 180002 is on page 22 of your agenda. It is important to note that planning committee did not consider on either of the occasions when the proposal was submitted under that reference 180002 was before it, that there were any neighbour amenity, design or conservation reasons to refuse the application. And those two discussions took place firstly under the 2006 local plan, but on the second occasion under the 2018 local plan, which is now in force. To move on to the details of the application, the proposal would retain the west and north frontages of the building of local interest, and I will clarify that for you in a moment or two. The proposal is virtually identical in form to the building proposed under 180002. The only differences in external appearance are minor changes to the configuration of the courtyard space and to the fenestration of elevations facing into that courtyard, and I will show you those in detail in a moment. This application did originally propose to make an alteration to the Mill Road frontage of the BLI, creating a new doorway where the bay window is at the moment. But that element was withdrawn from the proposal, and both the east and north frontages of the Labour Club BLI will be retained in their present form in this proposal. The uses proposed in this application are serviced apartments and cafe, gym and community space. The cafe, gym and community space would be open to community users as well as to occupiers of the serviced apartments. serviced apartments being apartments in which people could stay for up to 90 days. I have recommended a condition limiting stay to 90 days, and the applicants have previously indicated that they are entirely comfortable about the condition of that sort. The serviced apartments provide room for eating, sleeping, cooking, working, and the occupiers of those apartments have access to various services, including room cleaning and laundry. Now, this is the west elevation of the proposed building. It shows the retained elevation of the Labour Club building at the left-hand side. Those of you who visited the site yesterday will recall that we looked at the point where the original west elevation is joined to the extension to the rear, which was added later. That point is the end of the retained elevation shown on this drawing. It shows two further stories added above the retained building with a pitched roof. A new west wing covering and extending south of the footprint of the present west wing of the building, which is part 4-storey, part 3-storey, and part 2-storey. The north elevation facing Mill Road shows you the retained elevation. The 2-storey addition above is set back from that frontage by 2 metres. And this shows clearly the existing bay in the centre of the elevation retained in its present form. The east elevation, which faces the garden of 276 Mill Road, shows blind windows on the 2-storey section adjacent to this garden. The 3rd and 4th stories of the west wing, which is set 16 metres further back from this viewpoint, are visible in this straight-on elevation, but they will not be visible from the adjacent garden. The dotted line, which you can see on that elevation, is the outline of the existing east wing, which, as you can see, is lower at the north and south ends than the east wing proposed here, but higher than what is now proposed in the centre of the building. Now, just to be absolutely clear about this question of the changes in this building from that which was discussed under 18.002, the courtyard is reconfigured because in that previous application the courtyard was divided into 2 parts, one associated with the student accommodation and one associated with the nursery at the front of the building. As these uses have changed, that courtyard does not need to be subdivided, and therefore there is a single unified courtyard to the building. The only other changes are on these elevations here, which are the elevations facing into the courtyard. And as you will see by looking at that comparison, those changes are very, very limited indeed. There are slight changes to the ground floor windows in the courtyard elevation of the west wing, and on the east wing the number of windows in the first and ground floors is reduced, and therefore those windows are slightly bigger. So those are the only changes to the exterior of the building. This is the ground floor plan. Here I have marked the frontages of the BLI which would be retained. As you can see, the north range of the proposed building behind these frontages would contain a cafe and reception area for the service apartments on the left-hand side of the drawing, and on the right-hand side a gym, workspace and meeting room available for community use as well as by the occupiers of the serviced apartments. The main entrance to the serviced apartments would be on the west side facing Coleridge Road, and there will be 7 of these service apartments on the ground floor at the south end of the west wing and over in the east wing. This is the first floor plan, which shows you clearly how the additional 2 stories at the frontage are set back from the elevation line of the retained BLI frontages. It also shows you a further 17 serviced apartments on that level. There will be 10 on the second floor, and finally 2 more on the third floor. The site plan shows you the undivided courtyard in the centre of the building with landscaping, and it also indicates visitor cycle parking on the perimeter of the site. Apartment occupier cycle parking would be in the basement of the building, accessed by the ramp right in the centre of the drawing. The site plan also shows a single disabled car parking space adjacent to the Coleridge Road footway, and a designated drop-off space clear of the footway, which would also provide the access point for deliveries and waste collection. A number of representations have referred to the potential for the proposal to have an impact on on-street car parking. So I think I need to deal with that particular issue in a little bit of detail before I finish, because this is an aspect of the proposal where the different use now proposed is significant. Apartment customers' ownership and use of cars cannot be controlled in the same way that such ownership and use by students could be controlled in the previous application. I've considered the car parking question in detail in paragraphs 837 to 846 of my report, which is on page 44. But basically, to summarise, in addition to very clear guidance to customers in publicity, which can be secured by condition, that car parking is not available in the local area, and a number of benefits and incentives to encourage the use of other modes by certain target customers. This application proposes valet parking at a level equal to the maximum number of car parking spaces which the 2018 local plan would permit for this collection of uses. I have recommended 2 conditions, 34 and 33, which are on page 65 of the agenda, to ensure that the measures put forward by the applicants in this respect would be implemented and maintained. Since completing the amendment sheet, I have received an additional advice from the Conservation Officer to take into account the amendments to the to the Mill Road frontage. So I'm going to read this comment to you to make it clear what the Conservation team's view of the proposal now is. In comments dated 28th of March, I objected to lowering the sills on 2 existing windows of the ground floor left bay window of the Mill Road elevation to create entrance doors and steps up to the rear. This would be inconsistent with retaining the features of the important frontages of the existing building and in the context of this important objective is harmful. The case officer now informs me that the application has subsequently been revised to delete these changes to the bay in favour of retaining the existing layout and elevation. Provided this revision is retained as part of any approved scheme, my objection on this ground is no longer necessary. I'd also just like to draw your attention to the amendment sheet on which I've made 4 corrections to my text. One correcting the scriptural development to reflect the reduction to 36 units in paragraph 827, where I incorrectly referred to policy 50 when I meant policy 51. A correction to paragraph 834 about the adequacy of the waste storage, and an amendment to condition 21 to make it clear who's responsible for retaining records. On reflection, I now think that condition 21 requires a further amendment. So if you could just look at number 4 amendment sheet. The text that I put there is the proposed service department shall keep rooms. I think that should begin the operator of the service department shall keep records, etc. My recommendation is one of approval. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. We have one registered speaker, Mr. McEwen, on behalf of the applicants. Mr. McEwen, you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you very much.
Good morning, members. A resolution to approve was granted by this committee for a student scheme in March 2018. However, delays with the Section 106 and adoption of the new local plan meant the application was taken back to committee in November and refused, with the single refusal reason referring to the failure to identify an occupier for the student accommodation. Importantly, the committee considered the design and appearance of the scheme to be acceptable. This application seeks permission for a service department use, a form of accommodation of which there is a demand in the city. The principle of development is acceptable and the application will deliver high quality accommodation in a sustainable location. The existing building is in a rundown condition and the application will help to regenerate this prominent corner site. It will also ensure the retention and tidying up of the existing frontage BLI section. This will be to the forefront of the proposals, with the new building set back behind this element. The application will also deliver benefits locally. The cafe, bar, gym and business space will be open to local users, with the community room also providing additional meeting space. With regard to car parking, the scheme will deliver one disabled space along with the vehicle drop-off servicing zone. We do not feel the scheme will put increased pressure on on-street car parking, and this element of the application has been considered thoughtfully to ensure that this will not be the case. Guests will be informed when booking that no parking is available at the site or on the surrounding streets. This will be clearly outlined within all marketing documentation. Given the location of the site in close proximity to the railway station and the presence of good bus services locally, people would not require a car to access the site. However, in the unlikely scenario if people do need to travel by car, a number of mechanisms are to be put in place to ensure that the scheme will not impact on existing parking levels. These include a valet system, and the operators will purchase 15 season tickets within the Queen Anne car park, zip car membership and a daily car hire arrangement with Avis. The Mill Road area has been recently identified in the Sunday Times as one of the best places to live in the UK. This application will enable visitors to come and experience the Mill Road culture and environment, while also helping support the wide range of independent cafes, restaurants and shops present. I'd like to just point out that the design of this application, as noted by the case officer, is almost identical to the previous scheme, and importantly the Mill Road frontage is no different. In summary, a high quality development is proposed and one that complies with both national and local planning policy. The site has fallen into a state of disrepair. However, this scheme will rejuvenate this prominent site whilst retaining the existing historic element. The proposal should be welcomed, and we would respectfully request that members concur with the officer recommendation. Many thanks.
Thank you, Mr. McEwen. Tony, anything to add? What you've heard? Okay. In which case, open to members for question, discussion and decision. Councillor Pagecroft.
Thank you, Chair. The disabled parking, is that near to an apartment that has got disabled facilities? Because if not, it's quite a long way to go, because there's no outside doors, only one further up for the reception. There's a bit of a way to go to get into the complex. So if that isn't near an apartment that's specifically for disabled, can we not move that disabled parking a bit further up?
You've got to address that quite specific, Tony, it would be useful to clarify.
Yes, Chair. You said car parking spaces in this position here.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you turned it off now. Sorry. You've turned the mic
Sorry.
off. Thank you.
Yeah, it's in this position here.
Yeah.
The entrance is here, so that's reasonably close, and this apartment here is one of the apartments which is suitable for use by a disabled user. So I think they are reasonably close.
Thank you.
Just trying to replicate the previous application, Tony, does that conform with what the previous application provided, a disabled space, ignoring it was a student?
Yes, it is.
In that same position?
I couldn't be certain.
Okay, I think you might have been, but... Councillor Singer.
Thank you. I think this is a very, very interesting application, and I think the issues about it seem to be entirely to do with the use in that the building has already effectively been passed by the planning committee, but there are questions about the way it's going to be used. So my questions are particularly about serviced apartments and the difference between that. Clearly they fall under a completely different planning section from accommodation, because otherwise this application would have a whole range of things that were needed, including affordable housing. If you were asking for 36 flats, there would be affordable housing related to that. So my question is, what is there to stop this applicant coming back in a year's time, or would they need to come back in a year's time if they wanted to change it to residential? What is there effectively stopping this from being used as a residential building at any point in the future once it's been built?
Okay, perhaps you could come back on that straight away, Tony.
Can you use your...
Sorry, John. Essentially, it's the policy that applies in this application, that be clarified, and obviously is it compliant, and how is it then?
But it's about how particularly what mechanisms do we have to make sure that this continues in the future? Because these look to me like apartments which could perfectly easily be lived in by somebody forever. They have not been designed to be a hotel. They've been designed to be flats. So what is there to stop this applicant using those flats?
Yeah, so essentially a clarification of the policy on which this is being put forward.
And its future
future
protection.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, clearly this is a very important aspect of the proposal. The key element of this is that I have recommended two conditions, condition 20 and condition 21, which are on page 59 of your agenda. I don't think it's correct to say that these apartments are not designed as visitor accommodation. I think they are designed as visitor accommodation, and during the course of the application, some detailed alterations to the layout of the rooms themselves to make them suitable for the kind of visitor which the applicants envisage, allowing them in particular appropriate space both to work and to eat while they're working, have been made. But the key aspect of this is that occupation of these units will be limited to 90 days in any 12 months. So nobody could become a permanent resident once they've had their 90-day stay carrying out some project with some employer in the city, for example. They would then not be able to reside in them any further. And I have worded that to say the maximum cumulative stay in the service apartment, so that you know, there aren't kind of loopholes so that somebody could be theoretically out of the room for one day and then come back in again for another 90 days. And the reason for condition 21 is to ensure that the records which would enable the City Council to monitor that 90-day limit on stays would be available to it at any time. Now, I am confident that those two conditions are sufficient to ensure that this development would be occupied as visitor accommodation, and that anybody who lived in it would be there for that short period and would then go away. Obviously, there are people who have a suspicion that it would not be used in this way, but I think those two conditions would allow the City Council to monitor this in an entirely satisfactory way and ensure that the accommodation is used in the way that it is designed and the application is presented and which are in accordance with policy.
Councillor Singh, you want?
Can I come back? I understand all that, and I absolutely accept that as long as these conditions are in place and as long as this application is in front of us, that is what we have to consider. What I want to know is if they come back in a year's time and ask for change of use, what mechanisms do we have then for either resisting that, given that the building is perfectly possible to be used as a residential place, or for requiring affordable housing at that stage, because I think if you have change of use, then you don't have affordable housing. I'll
let Tony answer, but clearly change of use is
a different matter.
Is based on different policies, and they have to be policy compliant in that regard, but that change of use may or may not be. But Tony, you want to?
Well, yeah, I just want to say, first of all, this is a sui generis use, that's to say a classification of its own, so changing to anything else would require permission for a change of use. Were an application to be made for a change of use, you would be dealing with an entirely different application, and it would have various implications covering affordable housing, transport, parking, all sorts of things which would apply that don't apply to this, waste collection and storage. So any application to change the use of this building to other uses would have to deal with all those other questions, and I think it very unlikely that a change to use of the radical sort, which Councillor Nessing has suggested, would be able to answer those differing implications in such a way that it could conceivably be approved.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, and while Mr. Collins referred to 21, just to repeat, although it says on the amendment sheet the same as in the report, the condition 21 is to be amended to read: the operator of the proposed service apartments shall keep records, etc. The reason for that is to give a point of responsibility and a contact for that point of responsibility as on the back of that condition. So just to clarify that. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. Firstly, I was of the understanding, but obviously I could be wrong, that this size development would require 2 disabled spots. So why has that not happened? And I don't feel like I can support something if there is not, you know, the amount that should be available for disabled people. As regards to parking spaces, I also share the same concerns as Councillor Pagecroft as regards to the distance to this. Also share the same concerns as Councillor Nettesinger. Sorry, hope I pronounced that right.
That's fine.
In regards to what is the long-term plan for this development. Pardon?
To the chair.
That's completely lost my train of thought.
Come back.
Yeah, okay, so there's those 2 things. And I just think that it's a shame in an area where we do need some more affordable homes that an Airbnb is going to go there. But yeah, okay, so can you explain to me why there isn't 2 disabled parking spaces? Thank you.
Just to be clear, the use is self-service apartments, whatever you may feel that means, that is the description. It's got its disabled space, particularly class one.
Chair, can I refer you to paragraph 828 of my report.
Page 42.
On page 42, yes. The inclusive access aspects of this proposal need to be assessed with reference to policies 56, 57 and 77 because it is visitor accommodation. It's not residential accommodation and therefore the requirements of policy 50 for residential accommodation don't apply. Policy 77 doesn't make a specification as to how many and what proportion of visitor accommodation should be accessible to those who use wheelchairs. However, this application makes 2 rooms suitable for wheelchair users, so that's 2 above what is required, above the minimum requirements. In view of the fact that there isn't any requirement to provide wheelchair user rooms in a development of this sort, it doesn't seem to me reasonable to require that 2 disabled parking spaces are required because the application is providing above the level of the minimum that's required. So if we were to say, for example, no, this is not appropriate because it doesn't have 2 wheelchair, it doesn't have 2 disabled car parking spaces, the applicants could reduce the number of wheelchair accessible rooms from 2 to 1, which would still be in accordance with policy, and then it would be in accordance with the car parking policy as well. So you would lose a wheelchair accessible room without gaining any additional disabled car parking space. There isn't a basis in policy terms to insist on having 2 disabled car parking spaces under the requirements of policy 77.
Councillor Thornborough.
I've also got concerned about the usage, this new usage and how it's going to be controlled. And my understanding is this the first planning application that's come to the City Council with this use class. And the conditions 20 and 21 relate to the usage that we're talking about. And I feel that I think there's going to be ways around dealing with condition 20, which says about 90 it shouldn't be occupied more than 90 days in any 12 months. But I don't know, does that mean the same room? It may be that people might change rooms or change a different size, but I don't think this is nearly strong enough. And I also feel that keeping now in our digital age, if there is an abuse of this use class, I feel that information must be kept much longer than for 24 months because it doesn't actually hold any physical space. I think it should be for something like 5 years, and I also think that it shouldn't be necessary for the council to request records. I think the records should be submitted to the council and retained for 5 years and going on, because of we don't know now how we're going to deal with this and what sort of problems might might arise and what sort of records we need to go back to see who was staying when and how it all worked out. It may be that this works out to be a very successful scheme and we have more rolling out in the future, but I feel that we need to be very careful and safe as possible going forward. That's to do with 20 and 21. Also, I want to ask about policy 28, which is to do with carbon reduction and the requirement that this non-residential development should be a minimum level of green excellence for non-residential buildings. And this scheme seems to be there in part, but not fully meeting the carbon reduction targets that's been set out in our local plan. And I do feel it. I don't see why we're accepting almost green excellence. Green excellence is not that difficult to achieve. It doesn't mean that the building is. It's not just to do with the building. It's to do with many more things. And I feel that it should be the minimum, actually, and that if necessary, we should put in as an informative that this level should be reached on this application. And I also think that because of the size of the scheme and the number of people here and the possibility that people are coming for very short-term stays, that we should be considering a fire sprinkler system. And again, I know that this is something we can't ask for, but I feel that we could put in some wording as an informative to strongly suggest that the fire sprinkler system is part of the application. Thank you.
Just assist Mr. Collins in one respect, Councillor Thornborough. If you do read condition 20 closely, it does say any individual occupier, so that obviously refers to the fact that it's and any individual cannot stay more than 90 days in those 12 months. I think that answers that point. But
thank you, Chair. Yes, I do believe that wording would avoid the problem Councillor Thornborough is concerned about of occupiers moving from one room to another. I had that in mind when wording the condition. To go back to Councillor Thornborough's other points about question about condition 20 and 21, I am not at all opposed to the idea of making those conditions as rigorous as they can possibly be if members wish to alter the wording I've originally suggested. But there are two things that I think need to be borne in mind. One is that a condition has got to be reasonable, and it's got to be to do with the planning application. And I don't think it would be reasonable to suggest that data be supplied to the City Council without us giving any reason why we need it. So I am wary of changing the condition to say that information must automatically be supplied to the Council, because I think we might find it hard to demonstrate what the reason was why we needed to do that. Quite apart from the fact that it would result in a large amount of data which we would have to handle, which we might not need to. And the other thing I think we need to be careful about in terms of the length of time for which records are retained is that we would have to comply with the national laws about data protection. And I think if you try to retain records for unduly long, there will be a danger of straying across the rules in that respect. So I would just caution to be a little bit careful about altering the exact wording of conditions 20 and 21. As far as the sustainability question is concerned, I did have a lengthy discussion with the Senior Sustainability Officer about this, and you will be well aware that she is very keen to ensure that proposals achieve maximum compliance with the sustainability policies. Her view was that the sustainability elements that have been inserted into this application are as good as is reasonable on a development of this sort, considering that it has been under development for some time. Clearly, the fact that it's a development which retains part of an existing building makes achievement of sustainability standards a little more difficult. I can only really go on the sustainability officer's advice on this because she has expertise which I do not have. She was very clear that in her view the sustainability elements of this proposal were acceptable. And as far as the last point about fire strength is concerned, that certainly is something which could be inserted as an informative, but as Councillor Thorpe said, it isn't something that we can control by planning regulation.
Yes, I believe we added this as an informative at a previous meeting, and it's pretty helpful. I'm sorry, willing to accept that as an informative. Put that on there. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Green.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. I've got a bit of a cold, if you can bear with me. I went to the site visit yesterday and had a look round, and it was derelict and crying out for development. It's a beautiful site, it's in a prominent location, it's quite a big site. There's a beautiful frontage obviously on Mill Road on the east and west elevation that needs to be conserved. But I've still got reservations about the nature of the application. The developer's representative has said that it's nearly identical to the previous application. And I agree with that. The previous application was student accommodation, and a student organisation, a university or something similar, wasn't identified as a partner. I still don't think that's the case, so presumably they just changed the name of the development from student to serviced apartments. And I share concerns of councillors around the table that it's, there are too many risks really that the use of this development could diverge into something which doesn't add community value and makes current pressures on the environment around that part of Mill Road worse, like the parking pressures, like the cost of housing, the availability of housing, and all those kind of things. I think it is a fairly blunt attempt to get under the wire as far as providing affordable housing, and I think we need to clamp down on it. The condition that you're talking about applying, 20 and 21, which requires rotation of residents that are only allowed to stay for 3 months, to me already seems unreasonable. And because it's going to put the council to expense because we've got to enforce that condition. And if this continues to happen around Cambridge, it's putting an excessive workload on the council's planning department. There's already that condition applied to a property in Chesterton, I think it's called the Triangle, and it's flouted. We're finding it hard to recruit enforcement officers, and yet we're piling the work on just to monitor whether or not this development exceeds a sort of arbitrary condition to make sure that nobody lives there. Well, of course, if we don't keep our eye on it, we drop the ball, people are going to start to live there because, as the agent pointed out, it's a highly desirable part of Cambridge, where we badly need affordable housing. The council's going through its own expense in building housing at the old depot site, yet we're letting private developers off the hook. So, I'm not in favour of this development. I think the developer's got a fantastic opportunity to provide something really worthwhile and contribute to the local community and make a really valuable contribution, and they're not doing that. I don't agree that valet parking is appropriate. Driving up and down Mill Road to go to the Queen Anne car park, we're trying to reduce the amount of pollution in that area. Plus, we've got a lot of pressure on Queen Anne car park already. I don't even think it's appropriate to have service departments in that part of Cambridge. How big are they? Does that comply with our space standards? Is it even required to comply with our space standards? We're already looking at a situation where the disabled parking is bit on the iffy side. 2 disabled apartments for only 1 space because of inadequate planning policy. You know, I've got numerous concerns about it, and I really wish the developer would take a serious look at our affordable housing issues, take this application away, and come back with an application that meets local needs, provides affordable housing, and really involves itself in the community around Romsey. Those are my comments, Chair.
Councillor Hipkins going to go in, but he may add to what I'm just about to say, but our role is not to redesign schemes before us or to advise applicants how they design schemes once it gets to this sort of late committee stage where we're being asked to make a decision on what's before us. We are here to look at it whether it's policy compliant. There's a policy within the new local plan that deals with self-service apartments. The issue is then whether it's policy compliant to do that. And as a sort of a general point, though people will have concerns about applications, the planning system, rightly or wrongly, works on the basis of good faith. It works on the basis that what is put before us is what is expected to be delivered in terms of an application. If down the line that is proven not to be the case, clearly enforcement is a tool that we use, and clearly at the condition stage or the application stage we can add conditions where we have grounds for trying to ensure different issues are monitored and looked at closely from the outset. That's the sensible sort of approach and the traditional approach that we've taken over many years and approach taken across the country with other authorities as well. But like I said, we must base it on what we see before us, and yes, rightly or wrongly, the planning system works on a good faith principle, i.e. what's put before us and argued before us is what is there. Councillor Hipkins.
Chair, I'm very concerned about the drift of the discussion. I fear that we're likely to make a serious error in our decision. I think that it's important to remember that very careful notes are being taken of today's discussion, and the sort of reasons that are being advanced for resisting this application are being very carefully noted. You have already dealt with a matter that has arisen with 2 or 3 speakers so far, which is that the developer ought to have come forward with a different development. That's not for us to say. We have no authority to order developers or anyone else to come forward with applications. We are here to consider a bona fide application from a bona fide party, and we have to deliberate on that application. Now, I think one of the things that will be observed about this whole exchange of views is how reasonably the case officer has time and time again explained the policy position. There can be no requirement, for example, that fire sprinklers are included. This is not a planning matter. It might, for all I know, be a building regulation matter. But come on, there are limits upon the powers of this committee, and we must respect those limits. I could think of other uses to which this building can be put, but that's totally irrelevant. The building is going to be regenerated. We have already approved in broad outline its design. It is going to provide community uses. At the moment, it provides nothing to the local community except an eyesore. It will retain those features of the building which the conservation officer is most keen that we should retain. They will be retained. So I think we've got to be extremely careful. I mean, the other thing was this stuff about disability parking. I mean, again, the case officer made it absolutely clear that the offer of disability rooms is already in excess of policy. And he's made it as clear as possible that the parking for the disability person, should there be one, is as close to the flat as can reasonably be expected. You know, this word reasonable is going to be the word that will be constantly examined at a subsequent inquiry, should this go to appeal. And I do beg members, however much they feel that some other use should be made of this building, to bear in mind the need to be reasonable in their objections.
Thank you. Anybody else hasn't spoken, Mr. Point at this point? Councillor Biden.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to draw attention to the planning consultation response from the Conservation Officer. The functional design needs of the proposal are poorly integrated and illustrate there is simply too many uses being squeezed into the scheme. Does the officer know if the Conservation Officer has withdrawn their, because there were two of them that signed it, their suggestion that we reject the scheme on the basis, because the front's changed, that's now okay, or does this other issue still stand? Because as far as I can see, the other issue still stands.
Sure, Mr. Collins covered that earlier, but do you want to repeat
No.
that?
Chair, the advice that's in my report is from the conservation and design teams together, and the advice that they gave me integrates those 2 points into a overall view of the scheme. And what they were saying there essentially was that because the frontage was proposed to be changed in the original proposal, the benefit from retaining the important parts of the BLI would be diminished, and those would be outweighed therefore by shortcomings in the design. So the answer to Councillor Page's question is no, the alterations to the frontage don't alter the design and conservation team's combined view of the internal layout of the building, but they do alter their view on the balance of benefit and loss or harm caused by the scheme as a whole. The other point I've made about shortcomings in the internal layout is that the internal layout of the spaces in the building could be changed in most cases without needing planning permission unless new uses were involved. So it would be very difficult to sustain a reason for refusal on the particular configuration of the other uses included in the frontage building.
Councillor
Chair, can I put that question a different way? Have the planning consultation response from the design and conservation team changed their recommendation that the development proposed is unacceptable? Have they actually changed that? I know what you've said is that they're no longer got an objection to something that isn't there anymore, but have they changed their response? Has it moved from unacceptable to acceptable?
Chair, I can only repeat what I read to you from the Conservation Officer's advice to me. He said, The case officer now informs me that the application has been revised to delete these changes to the bay in favour of retaining the existing layout and elevation. Provided this provision is retained as part of any approved scheme, the objection on this ground is no longer necessary. That seems clear to me.
So it stands, what, the other part of the...
Excuse me, through the chair. Sorry, Councillor Green.
Sorry, Chair, the question that Councillor Bajan raised was that the Conservation Officer has made comments on 2 points. One was the facade and one was the combination of uses for the development. And subsequently, the facade issue has been resolved to the conservation area's satisfaction, but the combination of uses hasn't.
That's their original view. I disagree with that view personally, but I will say so why in a minute, but that's their view. But the bigger issue of the frontage is obviously been satisfied.
Can I just come back on that, Chair? I'm trying to repeat more clearly what I said before in answer to that question. The combined response of the urban design and conservation teams to me originally felt that because the frontage to Mill Road was being altered, the degree of harm caused was increased, and that the configuration of the interior did not give a benefit which would outweigh that harm to the building of local interest. The conservation officer's view now is that because that Mill Road frontage has been changed and there is therefore not harm caused to the appearance of the building by altering the window to a doorway, the balance between those two elements has tipped back the other way and the objection is withdrawn.
I think it's also fair to point out that the conservation team will be making a balanced judgment. They would, of course, hope that any application would be near perfect in conservation terms. But most applications are less than perfect in conservation terms. The question is the bottom line acceptable? And it's again been made perfectly clear to us that it is. So although they may have reservations, although they may conceive of a scheme that was from their point of view as conservation officers perfect in every respect, and this is not necessarily that perfect representation, it is nevertheless good enough.
Councillor Green, will come back on that point?
So I'll just reread the relevant part of the Conservation Officer's comments from Councillor Bajan's question. He says, in our view, the above issues highlight that the functional design needs of the proposal are poorly integrated and illustrate there is simply too many uses being squeezed into the scheme. That was the essence of the comments that I made as well, too many uses. And we're attempting to dress it up by putting a condition on there saying that we will monitor it. It's fundamentally flawed. It's a development which is attempting to avoid making an appropriate contribution to affordable housing by hiding behind our policies.
So you're talking about hypothetical situation, Councillor Green. You've got to talk about the application for us, sorry.
I'm talking about this development. I don't think I'm talking about hypothetical.
This application doesn't have an affordable housing element involved with it. That's what I'm spoken for.
It doesn't have affordable housing because it is being put forward as serviced apartments.
It doesn't have to have affordable housing.
I understand that serviced apartments don't have to have affordable housing, but the point I'm making is that it's been deliberately dressed up as serviced apartments when we are relying on a condition to monitor that, which I think is unreasonable, which puts a heavy burden on the council at a time when we're under severe pressure. We are being asked to check regularly that this isn't being used for housing. That's the point. We're applying conditions which are unreasonable to us as a council. okay? And the conservation officer has spotted that there are too many uses being squeezed into the scheme. Come on, open your eyes.
I think you repeated very much what you said earlier, Councillor Green. I was hoping it would be a different point, but people have...
Chair, I have another question.
Councillor Hayden?
The rejection of the student accommodation, would that mean that this can't be used by students, or it could still, because it's 91 days, on 91 days, it's a 13-week term. Is it possible that those 90 days, the 90-day limit, that students could still rent this?
Let's be clear, under local plan policy, current local plan, as in 2018, this could still have been a student accommodation development if there had been formal endorsement from one of the registered institutions that we've identified as needing to give that formal endorsement. The applicants have chosen not to go down that route, have come back with a different application. So, yes, that's... but the issue here is about the 90-day requirement, and that will apply to any individual.
So it could be used for student accommodation?
So, Mr. Collins?
Chair, I think it's important to be clear that serviced apartments is a valid way of using a building. It is recognised as a particular land use, a classification of its own. There are plenty of serviced apartments about, not only in this authority, but in all sorts of other authorities as well. The 90-day limit, which I have recommended as a condition, would ensure that those serviced apartments are used as serviced apartments. It would not place a particular restriction on any quality of the person who occupied it, because it wouldn't be reasonable to do so. If somebody is going to live in those apartments for 90 days, they are entitled to live in them. It would not be reasonable to put forward a condition preventing a particular category of person from living in it. But it is not... It is student accommodation is accommodation which needs to provide for a student throughout the course of their study of a period of a year or more. Placing a 90-day restriction on the occupation of the building prevents that from happening.
On a point of order, Chair, does the adjournment procedure apply to this application?
Yes, we're on major applications, so if that decision should be required, then that we'll take that decision. But I'm just going to make a couple of comments, because I think everybody's had their opportunity, and then we'll come to the vote we made. On the site visit yesterday, I've not been there for a while. It's clear that over many years there's been very poor maintenance, control and proactive sort of management of this building, which is, I think, a great shame when you consider its history and how it was founded and built. But we've got to this stage now where we have a derelict building, as Councillor Green quite rightly said. It's a derelict building with an awful lot of problems, internal and some of the exterior issues are quite obvious as well. We've had a previous application on this site that this committee approved. The issue was it wasn't signed off before the new local plan came into being, and therefore that fell by the wayside, and the applicants have had to come back with a new application. They put this application forward. We have to judge it on its merits. Some may not like the idea of the application, but we have to judge the application that's before us and test whether it's policy compliant, whether conditions attached to the recommendation of approval are sufficient to give us satisfaction and security in terms of making that decision. But in terms of the essence, the design is very much identical to what was approved before. And the point about the number of uses, which obviously has expressed a concern by one consultee, well, clearly there's a history here of a community linked to this building, and having a a gym, having a cafe, having a community space may retain that community link. It seems obvious to me that that was something to be welcomed. And if it's to be successful, then let's hope this footprint and the design of it is sufficient to make that achievable. But I think that point about mix of uses, I think there's a desire to try and balance some of the uses here. But I think to retain a community link is important. I think the recommendation is fairly clear, and I've read the report, I've heard the questions. I'm certainly happy to vote for the approval, and I will do. But that's for people to decide on their own part. But I will just put this to the vote. I think we've had a pretty good discussion. The recommendation is one of approval. Those in favour of that recommendation, please show.
5, Chair.
And those against.
4.
Okay, so that's approved. Thank you very much. We have